Right, time for the technical side of the seasons. Disregard all the other junk. I've sort of already started working on the next project, and I'm not really sticking to the map I outlined just yet. Oh well. So yeah, this episode is going to be a very technical one for anyone who wants to sort of understand how exactly I made my seasonal system. So for that reason, if you're not really interested in the back-end stuff, the command stuff, well, you don't have to watch, right? And I think that's probably the best way to set this up going forward, so anyone interested in just seeing the features showcased can have the previous style of episode, and anyone interested in the actual mechanics can click on the technical one, right? Right. Okay, so we'll start off by, well, grabbing our data pack folder. So in here, we have, obviously, our data, and then Minecraft, my general functions that I run, so we don't really have to go over them again. If you're curious, they're just my timer systems and a few systems that need to run constantly. I've gone over them in the first episode, right? But the ones we're interested in today are both functions and tags. So starting off, we'll go through the tags. So tags are delightful little documents that you can create essentially, and you can have block tags, entity types, items, and world gen. And this allows you to categorize different elements of Minecraft, so for instance biomes, into different subtypes. So I've gone ahead and I've listed out all the biomes I consider cold, or I might want to run my cold season in. Okay, so we've got stuff like jagged peaks, frozen peaks, groves, slopes, taiga. Just wonderful, wonderful selection tool. So now that we have that, we could do the execute if biome, and we'll do our coordinates, and then we can look for our specific tagged allotments. So for instance, Runechant cold, this will look for any sort of cold biome, which obviously desert, or point in case this is void at the moment, doesn't trigger. So that's essentially the main tester, if you will, that I'm using to control which seasons run in what biomes. So I've gone ahead and set up all those in the data pack, as we've just seen. So we've got cold and isolated and populated, nether harsh, nether reprieve, neutral, special, underground, and warm. So that's the tag set done, or the selection criteria done. So what about the actual commands? Well, simple enough. If we go into our functions folder, you can see I have been hard at work. Yes, there's a lot more functions, and all these ones that are labeled with seasons, well, they refer to the seasonal system. So we've got environment, game rules, icons, particles, and then a few different special ones like the environment 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right then, so why don't we open something up and take a look at how exactly it works. So we'll start with the icon system, for instance. So all I'm doing is checking our scoreboard again to see if it matches within a certain range. So if we go ahead and open that scoreboard, objective, set display, not remove, one too early, sidebar, timer, seasons. Okay, so we can see that the season timer right now is, what is that, 548,000 and, well, 100 ticks roughly. So you divide that by 20, gives you seconds, divided by 60 gives you minutes, yada yada yada. We're pretty far into the season. So for instance, if I hop into the deserts, the current season is Gale 1. As we've seen before, they transition between different levels of the season, so I think it's this one. So for instance, this is max scale, and you can see that the timer has actually decreased. That's because these seasons actually ramp up, so they start small, get bigger and bigger, and then progress back before heading into the next actual season. So the way I've done the actual icons is using the title action bar. So this allows you to display anything you want at the action bar, so right in the center there. Then I just had to come up with my own icons and assign them. So this is where it gets a bit more technical and a bit more tricky, and I myself had to look all this up. But if we head back into our folder, we'll go to our actual resource pack. So all the way to my Minecraft snapshot folder, and we've got resource packs, Runechants, assets, Minecraft, and then we have fonts. So as you can see here, I've defined all these different fonts using these numbers. Now I'm not going to try and make out like I understand what they are. All I know is starting from this UE000, you can assign different elements or drawings. So for instance, I am assigning the PNGs, the icons that I actually pull with the action bar. There are a lot of great tutorials out there for this, and I would highly suggest you go ahead and utilize those. To be honest, I don't fully understand it, I just know it works. Sad to say, but that's generally how a lot of this stuff goes. I solve problems using whatever combination of commands I can come up with. Whether or not they work in the most efficient manner, who knows? So yeah, so we'll not really touch on the icons, unfortunately, if that was what you were hoping I would go through. But altogether, I'm just using the action bar to display certain different PNGs at different times according to the timer season. Right, we'll head back over to the actual functions. That way we can take a look at the stuff I do know how to explain properly, the actual effects. So starting off with the particles. Particles are nice and simple too. Again, everything runs off of our timer. That is the core of it, and then we're just using it to generate different commands depending on what season it is. So we have Warp Spore, which I'm just generating, again, centered on the player's position using this whole string of commands. So execute if score timer seasons matches within a certain range to tell me that the season is active. And then we're testing for biome using our tag list, so Runechant cold. And then we're executing using our surface check, which I went over in a different video, which allows me to determine whether or not the player's on top of the surface or underground. And then we're just running the particle command. And that is how I generate the actual particles within the season. And, well, don't overload Minecraft for starters by just flooding it with huge amount of particles, but keeping the draw distance, so 16 blocks, pretty decent to sort of showcase that the season is, impacting the entire biome, or rather your view distance, if you will. Oh, well, that mushroom didn't want to stay there. Which brings us to the other thing, the actual random events in the season. So we've got a whole bunch to go through, so we'll start with some simpler ones. We'll go back here to Seasons Effect 1, and you can also see I have labeled them with different seconds, which I tie with my activators of the data pack. So for instance, this activator is running every second, and then if it matches a tick within that actual second, because there's 20 ticks in a second, it's going to run our different effects. So our first seasonal effects is a random area effect cloud spawning under a random entity. So I'm using random entities. So for instance, this tag here. That way I can create a bit of randomness in the actual season and who actually benefits or suffers depending on the biome. So we'll wait around and see if we can actually trigger the effect. Hopefully we get not the carpet, a green area effect cloud. There we go. We can't really see what it does because this one gives saturation. So yeah, so that just happens spontaneously, and again, is all controlled by our actual timer. So as long as it's between the season, and then the player is in the correct biome according to our biome tags, and then if we're on top of the surface, in this case, because this is positive, we are giving them a different effect. And this is, again, the core principle I use for every single one of my effects. So in actuality, the whole setup is literally just running this command to the run, and then setting the icon, setting the particle, and then any other spontaneous events I want to occur in the actual biome. So for instance, this first Season Effects 1 is all the area effect clouds that can spawn underneath the player. In Season Effects 2, we have a few more specialized events. So for instance, this is giving players experience if they're in that bloom season. If we go down to a later season, for instance this one, we get Frostbite. So this does no damage, but does drain our hunger. In fact, a slight issue here is you can't assign 0 damage. What you need to do if you want to not damage the player but still drain their hunger is do 0.1, which is in the wrong section. There we go. So if we replace them all, it'll fix everything up for me. Cool. Which then actually brings us to the other side of things. How do you do damage types? Well, if you didn't know, you can assign damage types. So we've got Bleed, Exhaust, Frostbite, Gale, Hunger, Scorched, Submerge, and Tainted. So we saw Frostbite. What does Frostbite actually do? Well, it inflicts exhaustion, which decreases saturation. So, like a lot of things that Minecraft has done, there's a lot of room to work in the back end of the game that Mojang themselves have sort of disregarded and never touched. So, for instance, luck as a stat, it can be applied to different loot tables, but the majority of loot tables that Minecraft or Mojang have created don't utilize it. Same with exhaustion in damage. Damage can inflict hunger upon a player, but the majority of damage types actually built into the game are set to 0. So you can create your own, for instance, and you can also tie in a message ID. So this message ID then links back to our resource pack, which we don't have to save this. If we go back to our resource pack quickly, we can go to Assets, Minecraft, and to Language. And in here, we've got all our different death messages showcased. So for instance, the Frostbite one, if it's death, attack, Frostbite, so the player just dies from the damage, well then it would say the player couldn't ward off Frostbite, but if another player were to inflict it and deal the killing blow to another player, it would say that player inflicted a harsh cold upon the other player. Right, so then that probably leaves the only last thing to go over, being how I utilize my RNG. So if you don't remember, I did set up a random number generator, and I do that to control some of the activations. So for instance, if we open the 1 second activate again, you can see here it says if score RNG variable matches between a certain range. So there are a few more conditions to whether or not the actual events trigger within a season. So this is looking again for that tick within 1 second, so 1 out of 20. Then it will check the RNG. If it's between 0 and 250, it will run Season Effect 1, otherwise it will run Season Effect 2 if it's between 125 and 500. This allows things to overlap some of the times, not overlap some of the times, not happen at all, or just do one of the other. And the same goes for all the other seasonal effects as well. I use RNG so that different effects can happen at different times, therefore simulating randomness and that the season is very varied and dynamic, rather than all the effects happening at one given tick, therefore allowing the player to actually understand when exactly they'll suffer negative or positive effects within a season. Okay, so I think that pretty much covers it. Now, I don't really want to sit here going through the commands word for word. I just want to go over my thought process, if you will, on how I actually assemble things. And then for the data pack as a whole, I don't want to really go over how to assemble it. There is wonderful resources just on the Minecraft wiki alone, how to actually utilize a lot of the data pack mechanics. That's what I use myself. So I just thought we'd go over how I create the random events within each season. Again, they're all controlled off of this one time, and that is how I run the majority of features in this data pack is through my elaborate timer system. So if we go set display sidebar, we can see that I have a lot of different timers allowing me to control a lot of different things at different intervals of the game. Therefore, again, creating more dynamicism rather than just having everything run at the same time. Hopefully that's a decent enough insight into the technical side of the seasonal effects. If you want something a bit more specific, just ask. And I will do another little tutorial, if you will, if you want to learn how to do something specifically. Other than that, I think I will just give a broad overview in the technical sides of how I actually assemble stuff. Right then, hope you enjoyed. See you next time.